Today's episode is brought to you by Create Engage, the digital marketing agency for the disruptive management consultancy. Digital marketing has moved forwards, but most consulting firms haven't. Many consulting firms still see their corporate blog as their sole digital marketing channel and find themselves frustrated when these blogs yield little, if any, results. For those consultancies that understand digital marketing, though, it can be a huge asset and help them achieve rapid business growth. In fact, at Create Engage, we've recently written a case study of one successful consulting firm that used digital marketing to help them grow over 400% in just 3 years. Having spent countless hours researching consulting firms and consulting leaders for this podcast, it became very clear that while some firms do digital marketing well, the vast majority of consulting firms struggle to leverage its power and don't know where to start. To help those of you who want to harness the power of digital marketing to grow your consulting business, but don't have the knowledge, capacity, or in-house capability to do so, I launched Create Engage, the first digital marketing agency for the management consulting industry. As former consultants ourselves, we understand the challenges that you face when it comes to delivering effective digital marketing that engages prospective clients and generates leads. Having worked in the industry, we understand consulting buyers, what resonates with them and what doesn't. This enables us to harness the latest in digital marketing in a way that aligns with your brand and your market positioning to attract the prospective clients that you're looking to target. We understand that each consultancy is unique and have a range of services to help you shape, implement, and sustain effective digital marketing strategies that deliver results, regardless of where you are on your digital marketing journey. If you would like to find out more about how Create Engage can help you use digital marketing to take your business to the next level, then send me an email at nick@createengage.co.uk or go to our website, createengage.co.uk, where you can download that free case study that breaks down the digital marketing strategies used by one successful consulting firm to help them grow over 400% in just 3 years and gives you the secrets they used so that you can apply them in your own firm. If you want to outpace your competitors and stand out in the crowded consulting market, then get in touch. We'd love to help you grow your business through digital marketing. Hi, and welcome to Climbing Consulting. One of the great things about running a podcast like this is that I get to speak to and share with you inspiring leaders in our industry, sharing their inside track on what it takes to succeed in consulting. I try to get guests on this show that I look up to and that I know others out there, listeners like you, do as well. And it was great to have a chance to interview one of my old mentors, someone who taught me so much about consulting and whose career has gone from strength to strength since I worked for him. Today, I go back to my old consultancy to interview Alex Gurr, partner and head of insurance at Baringa Partners. I worked closely with Alex on a number of projects during my time there and learned a ton from him. And over the last 5 years, Alex has gone from a junior partner to head of insurance, and working with his team has grown insurance at Baringa from around 15 when I left to just over 50 of them now. There's so many things that I'd always wanted to ask Alex to find out how he did what he did and how he's been so successful. And it was great to get the chance to sit down with him and go into detail on so many of these topics for the podcast. In today's interview, we cover a whole host of things, and there's so much valuable insight in here for you, including how Alex turned a series of fortunate opportunities into a successful career, and his advice for you if you're looking to climb to the top in consulting, how Alex's upbringing influenced his approach to leadership and the values that he sees as key for any successful leader, and the importance of diversity and inclusion in consulting, what senior consulting leaders need to think about when it comes to D&I, and what Baringa are doing to promote diversity and inclusion across their business. I really enjoyed going back to Baringa to speak with Alex. As I said, it's been almost 5 years since I left, and while it only feels like yesterday, it's been great seeing how the business, and particularly the insurance practice, has grown in that time. Alex has a ton to share, and this interview was a chance for us to sit down and get some of those great insights that I've benefited from out for you to hear. So, with the intro done and dusted, please sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Alex Gurr. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to be back. Now, I know we've seen each other since, but I was thinking on the train earlier today, I think it's about 5 years since I think we worked together. I left in 2015. So I'm sure, and we'll dive into today, there's been a whole host of things that have happened since then.
Yeah, it really doesn't feel quite that long, actually. Obviously, it's nice to catch up with you. We see each other fairly regularly, don't we? So, and it's great to see how your business is going, actually. It's always nice to see people who leave Baringa and go on to do brilliant things elsewhere. It's very satisfying.
Thank you very much. And we'll come on to the impact that you and others here have had on making that journey happen as we talk through the interview. But I'm conscious, obviously, we know each other really well. But for those who listening who maybe don't know you, could you just give a brief overview of your background and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So I've been working for 20 odd years now, which is obviously quite a frightening thing to say.
Don't look it if that makes you feel better.
No, I appreciate that. That's very flattering. And I guess I got here by what I call a series of accidents. Other people would look at it and say that's probably a bit disingenuous, but I left university flat broke, and like many people, I just needed to earn money. And again, that this sounds very, you said to me, be very honest, so that's what I'll be.
Yeah, go for it.
And I essentially took the first job that was offered to me, and I was very fortunate that I was offered a job. But I took a job working with Zurich Financial Services, so I found myself working in the insurance industry, somewhat by accident. But it was a great graduate program, and I was very keen to start working and start learning and, quite frankly, start paying my way in life. And then I progressed through Zurich over a number of years. Lovely company, a lot of fond memories of it, but decided I fancied a go at consulting. I worked with consultants, thought I'd give that a go. So got a job with Deloitte, got turned down by quite a few actually before I got a job with Deloitte, but they gave me a job and essentially retrained me in the world of consulting, which was really challenging actually at times. But, in the long run, I learned a huge amount through that organization. And I've got a lot of good things to say about them. And then, crikey, 13 years ago now, I took a bit of a punt and joined what was Structure Group and since became Baringa. And I've been here ever since. So, that's a very potted history.
Yeah, and part of the reason I asked the question is because it tees us up nicely for a whole host of places to dive into. And just to close that off, because we will come back to it, for our listeners, where were you in the sort of consulting hierarchy when you joined Baringa?
Yeah, I just made manager, actually. So that was 2007.
And so let's start with industry, because it's something that lots of people make that transition. Like yourself, I did the same, and I still remember the first week with was Jules and Paul, and going home with my brain completely fried. It's quite a shift I found from industry to consulting. And actually, looking back, what was it that made you want to make that change? And almost, you mentioned there that you'd been rejected by a number of consultancies. What was it that you had to hone, or how did you get that foot in the door at Deloitte?
Yeah. So why did I want to make the change in the first place? I think I really liked Zurich and I learned a lot there, and I'd done some really interesting projects with them. So I went into the IT department and I started off as a junior BA, and then I, worked my way through. I became a junior project manager and then a bit more of a senior project manager. And then eventually I got the opportunity to go out to Switzerland and work on what was a global finance transformation program. And I threw myself into it wholeheartedly, as I've tried to do with most things that I've done. And I was working with consultants that, they were helping me with that project, the past the projects I was running. And what I really liked was the fact that they'd had exposure to lots of different organizations and that they could bring that relevant experience to this project. And whilst I'd had a variety of experiences in Zurich world, I hadn't had the chance to go out beyond that. And I really wanted to see other organizations, and I wanted to work with different organizations and learn from them and take my experience to them. So that was the kind of key motivation. I thought it looked quite glamorous as well. And so I was a little bit seduced by it, if I'm honest. There's a great, to some extent, there's a great image around elements of consulting. What was it I had to hone? There's a huge advantage to working in industry, I think, first. I always really value, when we look at recruiting people, I always look to people who've worked in industry, because I think when you're a much more empathetic consultant when you've lived on the other side. And the depth of knowledge that you build up working in an insurance company, you and I know I work in insurance, is hugely valuable. And so I always really valued that. And I think my career was far better for it. I guess I just lacked an element of polish. And I was probably very naive at that time in terms of what consulting actually involved. And I sort of learned a little bit the hard way, to be honest. And then probably at that time, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I was a little bit directionless. And I thought when I interviewed with consultancies, I was very vague in terms of what I wanted and where I wanted to go. It was, I want to go and try lots of stuff rather than, being particularly focused on the type of work I wanted to do, the industry I wanted to work in, or why I wanted to do it. So it was much more about me rather than about what I could offer the organisation. I think I learned that quite quickly. And certainly as soon as I got to Deloitte and I started my retraining, as it were, I learned very, very quickly.
So I want to come on to the Deloitte and that transition, but you mentioned something really interesting there around those skills that, you get that empathy from being on the other side. And actually, I'd be keen just to pause on some of those. What were those things either then or that you find that you have to guide your team, your junior team on now, that were those key skills that you just are harder to get in a consulting environment because you're on the other side of the fence?
I suppose I suppose my memory was of how did it feel when I saw a group of consultants come into the organisation I work for and sit in a corner and not necessarily interact with me or the team that were there. And, we're doing some stuff internally at the moment around insiders and outsiders, those that are in the in-group and the out-group. And I always found a bit like an outsider in my own organisation when consultants came to work for us. So I think the thing that it brings is that sense of how are people within that organisation feeling about you being there? And how do you make them feel as comfortable and quite honestly safe as possible, whilst helping impart the knowledge that you've got? Because I would say as consultants, we're like house guests, and you've got to be a really good house guest. So you should come, you should be a really good house guest, you should offer to tidy up after yourself, you should be amusing, entertaining, etc. But then you also need to go. So all of those sort of, they're quite emotional feelings actually, I suppose, all of those things about how it feels to have consultants in your organisation working with you were things that I learned and I took into my consulting career. And it probably just made me interact with people slightly differently. And also I think having seen the talent that sits within an organisation, I've always been very careful to try and acknowledge that and support that rather than dismiss it. I've seen too many people go wrong in the past where, everyone's rubbish unless they work for my business, my consultancy, they're rubbish. And I think that's an utter nonsense. There's some incredibly talented people, lots and lots of incredibly talented people work in industry. And our job should be to help them, not to tell them that they're rubbish. Being really blunt about it.
So I really like that analogy of the house guest, because I think it's so true. And a bit like you, I've actually, when I was starting my career, I didn't interact much with consultants, but since leaving and going out for my contracting before starting Create Engage, it is, like you say, you see that dynamic. And I think that house guest analogy is really true, because sometimes consultants can focus on delivering the project and actually almost that is at the expense of the client or their people, which I'd welcome your view, I guess, is long-term not a great strategy for growing business, growing accounts, but can sometimes be the challenge if you're for people if they don't have that understanding.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. It's just empathy is hugely important in the work that we do. And sometimes you can deliver the right outcome in the short term, but actually deliver the wrong outcome in the long term. And I guess everything that I've done, certainly in the latter part of my career, has really tried to be about the long term. It's been about the long-term relationship, the long-term benefit for the organisation that I work for and the organisations we work with and for. So just trying to have that long-term view about everything has really helped.
When I was junior, I think one of the real challenges for me was that long-term view, because I think as you grow up, it's much easier to foster. And almost for those listening, or for your analyst consultants, senior consultants, how do you help them see that when they might turn around to you and go, well, Alex, it's easy for you, you're a partner. you can take the long-term view. How do you help them and start to build that mindset?
If I'm honest, you have to have faith that when you do the right thing, that good outcomes come from that. So, and again, it's one of the things I've always, it's probably instilled in me from a very young age by my folks, but I've always believed in doing the right thing, and not doing the right thing for me, but doing the right thing for everyone around you. And sometimes that takes a real leap of faith. I think actually it's just really important for people to see that they've got role models who take that approach and that they've been successful, to encourage people, because it's quite hard to see. If you're trying to measure long-term outcomes and long-term relationships and long-term benefit, there is a leap of faith in it because you don't see it in the short term. So the role model point is really important, and living and breathing it in the way in which you operate with your teams is really important. And rewarding them when recognizing when people make tough decisions is hugely important.
I want to come back to all of that, and you've teamed me up for something I'm also very interested in, which is sort of the values side of your approach, because there's some really, really interesting things, and frankly, just some things I've always wanted to dig in since I started working with you. So one of the nice things about this is I get to find that sort of thing out.
Okay.
But I want to, again, just sort of bring us back to just before Baringa, because I think there's an interesting question there. Now Baringa is hugely successful, well regarded in the industry, and everyone wants to. A lot of people I know are very keen to work here. So you've built that business phenomenally well over the last, is it 10 years? You said you've been here
13 almost. Yeah.
But obviously, like you said, you joined when it was Structure, which was still a decent sized business, but was nowhere near the size it is now. And I think, correct me, but you joined as number 2 or number 3 in the practice?
Right, number 4, yeah.
So, it was at the time, I suspect, a slightly different proposition. And I'd be fascinated about, how did that come up? What was that opportunity that you leapt on? And do you remember any of the questions either you asked yourself or you asked others when you were trying to make that decision of whether it was the right move for you?
I suppose the starting point or the trigger for it was one of the people that I'd respected the most at Deloitte was a senior manager I'd done some work with, a guy called Gareth Campbell. And I just, his value set and his way of working, his way of engaging both with clients and people internally was just aligned to how I saw myself and how I wanted to operate. And we were having a beer in the pub one evening, and we were both sort of having a bit of a moan about things, the usual kind of stuff that you do. And he said, "Look, I'm leaving. I'm going to join this organisation. Why don't you come and meet them? They're new, they're small, they want to build an FS practice." And, the center of the strategy is around people. It's about building this amazing culture and driving a business that benefits from that. And I thought, well, I like you. I like working with you. And that sounds fantastic. And I think I was struggling for broader role models at that time. There were lots of people who I had huge respect for professionally, but being really honest, there wasn't anyone that I just wanted to be like at that organization at that time. And so I went and met the people who were starting up the business, Adrian, who's now a managing partner, and a few of the others. And there was just this gut reaction that said, you've got to work with these people. You're not going to get an opportunity like this again. This is really exciting. You can build a business, and these people seem fantastic. A, they're super smart, but B, they were super high EQ, emotional intelligence, and very ambitious. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. So I phoned my wife after I met them and said, I'm going to go and join this place. And she's like, you're nuts. But I've always been a great believer. If I feel something, I will respond to it because I trust my gut a lot of the time. And, who knew at that point what it would turn into, but it proved to be a very good decision.
Yeah. And I think the gut point's really important. I can't remember who said it, and it was someone much wiser than me, but they were saying that almost every time they've not trusted their gut is the time it's gone wrong. I guess to your answer, it's some of these things you can overanalyze. And actually, if you get that feeling from them, it's right, and try it.
I think that's absolutely spot on. There are, and I've learned this again in slightly later life.
Sure.
It is important to challenge your gut as well, because, sometimes particularly where certain topics are concerned, you can have beliefs that are maybe, if unchallenged, not that healthy. So I always try and have a group of people around me who will help me challenge myself. And I really like that. But this was one of those where I think I knew so deep down and intrinsically that this was the right thing to try, that I'd be silly to pass it up.
So I'm going to hold on that gut point because I think a really important one, and I'd love to hear. I want to dig into your group, but I'd love to hear how you do that, because if I speak from personal experience, I think it can sometimes be hard to tell yourself whether you are rejecting your gut because it's the right decision or because you are pressured to do something, be it for time, be it for money, whatever it is. And almost you sort of persuade yourself out. Consultants are analytical types. It's very easy to analyze yourself out of something. How do you, or does this group help you almost challenge that gut and make sure that your head is aligned to your heart in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very lucky. The guy who I've basically been working for a number of years and who I'm now taking over from, Dave Wilson, was phenomenal at that. So he was a brilliant devil's advocate. Drove me nuts at times, but actually I learned so much from that. And having people around you who you can use like that, who can play devil's advocate and you can ask for permission to do that, is really important. I think there's something about making sure that you've got enough people around you who've got different views, different perspectives, and are not afraid to challenge you is hugely valuable. If you surround yourself with people who are just like you, think like you, inevitably it becomes an echo chamber. And I've never wanted that. So whilst I trust my gut a lot, I also look for lots of reference points, and I'm very, very happy. In fact, I really encourage challenge and perspective from different people on my thought process and the ways that we do things.
We will come on to inclusion, diversity, and you've teed up nicely some of the benefits that come from it. And I know you're really passionate about it and very active here at Baringa. So really keen to build on that. I guess I want to touch on, because there will be people who are like you were then, thinking about making that move. And I guess it sounds like for you, it all landed and it all felt like, right, this is the right decision. Were there any concerns that you had or that you now see when you're interviewing candidates of almost going from that big brand where you've got the credibility, you've got the badge, you've got all of the people around you, to almost taking that jump and going to from an FS practice of what I guess must have been hundreds to an FS practice of 4?
Yeah, I mean, I was terrified. It sounds very easy, but I was terrified because you sort of think, well, I'm exposed. I'm utterly exposed. There's nowhere to hide. And part of me loved that because I was, this is, if you're going to be successful at anything, you can't hide. You can't fake it. You have to just be good. You have to be good at your job. And when I interview people, I always look for 3 things. I look for IQ, but I don't want people to necessarily be the smartest. Intelligence is important, but it's not the be all and end all. I look for EQ, so emotional intelligence, and that's hugely important to me. And then I look for work ethic. And I think if you can combine those 3 things, then you will be a phenomenally successful consultant. But I was worried, did I have the IQ? Did I have the work ethic? So that fear was definitely there. But I guess I wanted to trust. I trusted myself enough, and I wanted to prove myself as well.
Those all sound like brilliant reasons to do it. Was it that drive to, like you said, prove yourself that almost overcame those nerves, or was there anything else in terms of you knew Deloitte was going to be there, or you could go back to Zurich? I guess I'm trying to just get that sense of, for anyone listening who's making that same decision, how can they get over that fear, or how do you guide people if it's something that people have brought to you?
I'm probably the wrong person to ask in some ways because I think I tend to be a little bit impulsive. The things I enjoy in life, if I see something and I think it looks like great fun or it looks like a challenge, I tend to just go and do it because I fear not doing these things more than I fear the consequence of doing them, if that makes sense. So to me, it was a tremendously exciting opportunity. Let's face it, the business was really well run and it was, well established already. It was 50-person consultancy, so it wasn't just going off on my own. But I also thought, I'm not going to get many opportunities like this. And I thought I would just kick myself if I didn't try it. And I didn't really think much beyond that, if I'm honest. And I've been very lucky. There was a moment in my life, actually, this will probably give you a bit more of insight into my psyche. There was a moment in my life where, as a kid, I was very sort of frightened of things. I was quite a timid kid. And it held me back from stuff. So what I've realized about myself is that everything that I've done in my adult life has been about trying to make up for the things I was afraid of when I was younger, in some ways. And I had a good friend of mine when I was in my early 20s who really sadly just dropped down dead of a heart attack. He had a sudden adult death syndrome. And his brother said at his funeral, stood up at his funeral and said, if he'd known he was going to die on this day, I don't think he would have lived a day of his life differently. And that had an incredibly profound effect on me. So almost it was like a light bulb going off. From that moment, I think I was prepared to take risks and prepared to try things, because my fear became not of what might happen. It was more what would happen if I didn't try it.
And I think it's a really powerful story. And I think that I massively agree with you. And funnily enough, similar that came to me in that sort of 20s. Now, I do think it is amazing how many people will hold themselves back from taking those opportunities, almost that fear of failure. And actually, I almost think it's quite hard if you've not either had an experience like that or not experienced a failure. Because I think one of the challenges in our industry is if you've gone through your teenager school years getting A's, you go to university, get your 2-1 or your first, and then you're into a job. Actually, you've never failed. And therefore, I don't know if you read Carol Dweck, Growth Mindset.
No.
I will send you a copy. She talks all about that, of almost the difference between growth and fixed mindset. Fixed being, I have these attributes, I can't do anything else. Growth being what you've just said of, I can improve where I am, I can improve what I do. And actually, I need to but to do that, you need to put yourself out of your comfort zone. And I think that's, really powerful advice of almost try it and see what happens after that. We should probably say as well, your hobbies include race car driving and flying planes. So to what you were saying, you do sort of flirt at the extreme end of activities.
Yeah, but they're things that I was a kid that walked around with a toy car in one hand and a toy plane in another. And they were I think they was just sort of ingrained in me. And it sort of got to that stage where you think, I will kick myself if I never try these things. And I'm very lucky. I have a wife and a family who encourage and support me with it because they know it makes me happy. But that bit you talk about in terms of fear of failure, and I think as an industry and as a group of people, we are terrible at talking about our failures. And one of the things I've tried to do, certainly in the last year or two, and with the team, is I talk very openly about the failures I've made, and I continue to make. I've had some almighty failures along the lines. I don't think we should be shy about it. And I sent a note out to the practice the other day where I was talking about a week that I'd had that was just disastrous. I was hopeless. But and you get some really nice notes back going, it's lovely to see that sort of side of things because we don't talk about it enough. But I was very lucky, actually. My first boss, it was almost like the first week in, he was a pretty senior guy, and he said, I want you to make mistakes. I genuinely want you to make mistakes, but I want you to learn from them. And if you make the same one twice, I'll fire you. And that had again, talk about moments in your career. That had a really profound effect on me because I took that quite literally. Actually, I had a you've got to go and try, and I try and pass that on to people that work for me and with me. Yeah, by all means, we all make mistakes and do it, but don't ever make the same one twice. Because that just shows you're not learning.
I want to fast forward a little bit, and I'll let you sort of press the button as fast as you want. It's always the next thing that I guess I entered the scene. I joined 2012, I think. So I think you were, I think you were a senior manager or director when I joined. And I guess the interesting thing for me then, and I'm sure for some of our listeners, is you made partner relatively young. You can tell me how old you were, so forgive me, my research isn't as good as it should be. But you mentioned around just your career being quite a series of opportunities you took the most out of and made the best of. Was there ever a point where between manager and sort of just before that you had one of those moments where you took a conscious choice to say, right, I'm going for this? Was there a sort of plan for it? And if not, what was that journey that took you there?
In all honesty, I've had so many wobbles during my consulting career, it's untrue. I've at numerous points seriously questioned whether it's what I want to do and why I want to do it, often coinciding with difficult projects or, mistakes that I've made along the way. So it's not, from the outside, it all looks very seamless. You get a job straight after university, you go into industry, you then go to a big four, you go there, you then hop into a small consultancy, you help build it, and hey presto, by sort of mid-30s, you make partner. From the inside, it's felt anything but that. It looks more like a seismograph, in my head anyway. So I think I've never really had a career plan. I've taken opportunities that have come my way, and I've probably created some. But equally, I was never just focused on being a partner. I was focused on always trying to do the best job I could. And if that then took me to the next level, then so be it. But it wasn't as though I was, from day one, I'm going to be a partner. And actually, even, until probably 2 years ago, I wasn't even that sure I wanted to be a BU lead. I enjoyed being a partner. Why did I want to be a BU lead? But you kind of get to a level and you sort of working out whether you're good enough for it. And the first few months, 6 months, a year, you think, crikey, I just want to be good enough at this level. And then you start realizing that you can do it. And then you start thinking, well, actually, I can do the next thing. And consulting is a bit of a weird career in many ways, because there is such a linear, sort of career path that you can follow. But this is rather a long-winded way of saying I'd never set out with that as my ambition. I'd almost taken it a day at a time and only gave myself the permission to think about the next thing when I was comfortable I could do what I was doing at that point in time.
How did you mentioned there that it's not been seamless, and that you've had those times where you've questioned, is it right? Do you want to keep doing it? How have you turned that corner? And is there anything that you regularly turn to, be it people, be it Dave, be it your wife, other friends? Is it books? How have you got yourself around from those periods when they've happened?
I think I've realised that having balance between work and home is really important. I don't always get it right. I'd love to see more of my family, and not just, my wife and kids certainly, but my broader family. I'm very family orientated. But I think it is really important to have things that distract you and take you away from work. You can't think about it all the time, or you'll find yourself, I'm sure people who listen to this will recognize that we all have times where we wake up and our jaw hurts and our teeth hurt because we've been grinding our teeth during the night because we're thinking about work. You can go through phases like that, but you can't live your life like that. So I've always tried to create balance outside of work. You touched on some of the things I like doing outside of work. They're really important to me. They give me time and headspace away from work. And I'm not obsessed by work. I really love my job. I really enjoy it, but I recognize it's hugely challenging. I aim to enjoy life overall, and work is an important part of that, but it's not my life.
And I think that's really powerful advice. And I can't remember if it was while I was here or afterwards, but I do remember you making that point of, even at the role you have now, you carve out that time. And like you say, you may not always get it right, but you aim to work just the same as anyone else in the team and almost role model that. How do you do that? Because, as you said, I'm now running my own business. It's hard to switch off from that. How do you do that when, I saw Christine earlier. She said the practice is 50 now. Is that?
Yeah, almost, yeah.
So you've got 50 people reporting into you. How do you either structure your time or manage that team so that you can take that time away?
Well, that's a good question. So first of all, it's not all me, because there's obviously 4 other partners, and I like to be very connected with the team, but I can't be there for everyone all the time. So I think I just get comfortable with that. I get comfortable sometimes that I have to drop things as well. It's an interesting question. I think you just have to be your own barometer, and you'll know intrinsically whether you're getting it right or not. I have some weeks where I think, I'm being a bit lazy. I probably need to work a bit harder. I have other weeks where I think, crikey, this isn't sustainable. But I try not to judge it in the short term. I look at it over sort of an extended timeline and think, do I have the balance right? And the wonderful thing is, I feel in control. And partly that's a privilege of being a partner. So if I'm not in control as a business owner, well, what hope does anyone else have? So I feel a responsibility to feel that, behave that way, demonstrate that to my team, encourage them to feel accountable as well. But yeah, crikey, if as a partner you can't set your own agenda, then what hope do you have? What hope does anyone have?
I want to turn to something that you just mentioned about actually taking that step up to BU lead. And it's just to jump on what you said around 2 years ago, you weren't sure you wanted it. And the answer to this might be quite quick to the point you said around actually you felt you'd mastered the grade you were at or were comfortable there. But I don't want to put words in your mouth. What was it for you that made you comfortable 2 years ago that actually, yes, that is the next step and I want to take it?
I think part of it was crystallizing by, Dave, announcing that he wanted to retire. He was a phenomenal BU lead, and I learned, more than I'd probably ever tell him in public that I have from him. I've learned a huge amount from him. I realized I could never be him. So it was quite important early on to not try to replicate that. Anyone who's met Dave Wilson will know he is utterly unique and brilliant. But I needed to do it in my own way. And I think I just got increasingly comfortable that I could do that and that people would see that as a really good thing. I think it just felt natural. It sounds really bizarre, but it just felt like a natural progression to me. What's been interesting is how I've then felt since becoming BU lead, and some of the things that you probably don't. It's like any grade that you move into. There are things that you don't know, you don't really realise, and you work out as you get there.
What have those been?
The biggest thing for me, actually, the biggest surprise is that feeling of obligation to a whole team, and the feeling of I need to build the leadership of the future. And this probably sounds a bit corny, but at some point I'm going to retire. I don't know when that is because I don't, as I've already said, I don't really have a great life plan, but I'm going to need to retire. And this business it will be bigger and it will be better by that point in time. Otherwise I will have failed. But that need to build a team that can then pick it up and run with it at that point in time is the thing that probably sits front and center of my mind. So that means developing people within, getting them ready for those leadership roles, bringing them through, coaching, developing. That's sort of become crystal clear to me. Almost within the first few weeks, actually, I felt that sense of obligation. And that's what I will spend my time focusing on, is building the leadership team for the next phase of our growth. But in doing that, you're building for the day as well. But it's also, come back to that, take a long-term view on things. This is build for the long term. And we have some incredibly talented people in our business, and people who I know will be far better at the job than I've been able to be, when they get there.
And there's an interesting part of I guess, that task for you. And this, well, you tell me if this is an interesting or the interesting part of also doing exactly what you've just explained with the rate of growth that you've had and I'm sure want to continue. If I think, gosh, when I left the insurance practice, I think was probably 15 of us, maybe 10. And the firm as a whole was 350, let's say. And you're now, like you said, 50 plus in insurance, 700 plus across the firm. How, if it does at all, does that scaling add to your challenge or, the things that you're currently focusing on that you just explained?
Well, in some ways, life becomes a bit easier because, we have, compared to when you were here, we have more brand presence, we have more market presence. We have more people, so we have more capability. So, in that regard, some things become a bit easier. In other regards, it becomes a little bit harder. But I think if you, for me, we always put, I'm particularly passionate about this, we put people sort of at the heart and center of the strategy. Because if you hire the right people, they do great things. They look after each other. They do brilliant things for clients. Clients want to work more with you. It's just this sort of amazing flywheel effect. So for me, it's about making the best possible hires. It's about making sometimes really tough decisions in terms of whether people should remain in the business and giving people feedback that is quite frankly at times uncomfortable, but is, it has to be given, and making sure you've got the right team there. I don't know if that answers your question.
So, well, it does, and I guess it's interesting to hear your perspective on it, and actually the because I now you've said it, it makes a lot of sense of actually as you're getting bigger, certain things get easier, not harder. Because like you say, you've got all of those things around you, and I must say I've certainly benefited from the growth of the brand since leaving. So thank you for that and keep going. But it is an interesting point, and actually you've said there as well. I guess the not shying away from the difficult conversations as well, and it brings us on to something that I've always wanted to ask you about. And this is, again, one of the nice things of hosting a podcast like this with people I know. And this may sound, like you said, a bit cheesy, but when I was working for you and subsequently, you're probably one of the few people in life, and this isn't to offend anyone else who's not in the room, of who I've never heard anyone speak ill of. I think there's sometimes, and I characterize things for this podcast just to drive the point home, of there's almost a characterization that success has to come with having trodden on people or having to done something a bit dodgy to get there. And I think you're a real testament to the fact that's not the case. And I know we talked about it a little bit before we recorded, but I'd love to understand what led you to take that approach in life and where that comes from and how that plays out in everything you do, really.
Yeah. I mean, firstly, it's a huge compliment, so thank you. I'm not sure everyone would necessarily agree with you. I'm sure that there are people who've found me difficult, and I know I can be difficult at times. I've always had quite a strong value set that was instilled in me by my mum in particular and my grandparents. So I've always sort of had this belief that you do right by people, and I guess I've been lucky in as much as I had sort of faith that will pay off and does pay off. It's probably also partly from the fact that I realised that I'm not the best person at the job I do, and to be successful, you need really good people around you. So if you think it's all about you and your success and your career, then you're not making the most of all the people, all the assets that you have around you. And I'm a great believer that you get the best possible answer by having a group of really motivated, smart people who will work well together, challenge each other, and come up with great answers. In consulting businesses, if you want a really smart person, you can go to the market and you can get an independent contractor. You can find individuals. The beauty of consultancies is the collective brain power and work ethic of that business. So I've always thought that the best way to tap into that is by trying to get the most from people around me, and then they get the best out of me, and together we get the best answer for our clients. I try not to shy away from tough conversations with people, but I hope that when I do have them, they recognize that it's coming from the point of, I want you to be better, I want us to be better, and from a point of positivity rather than negativity. And I've always been very happy to give people credit for things where it's due to them, not me.
And I think there's, in what you said there around almost that humility, that's really, really important. I think it's interesting, and it's not the first time I've heard it from someone, in your position, of actually that not seeing yourself as the best or the brightest. But I think that's very often, like you said, around the how people perceive your story from the outside. Now, people will look at you and go, "Oh, he must be a genius, a rocket scientist," and all of those things. But it's interesting hearing you say that actually it's about the team you build around you, not your individual skills.
Well, I learned I was not a genius very early on, so I failed my first year at university.
Did you?
Yeah, I did. So we talked about failures earlier. So I failed my first year engineering degree and had to go and start again and do another course. But I realised that the thing I am quite good at is I'm quite good with people. Not everyone, but I am good at people, and I think I'm good at getting the best out of people, or at least that's what I would hope people would say about me. So, yeah, working out that me on my own, Alex trying to solve things on his own is definitely not the way to come up with the best possible answer.
How do you do that? For you, how do you get the best out of your team?
I try and get to know them. So for me, it's really important to know people as individuals, to know what makes them tick, to know what they want to achieve. Every conversation with a colleague, I try and ask, what can I do to help you? Because it's important, it's really important that people feel they're getting something from the relationship with you and from working with you. Otherwise, it's a one-way transaction. And I think we make this mistake as an industry far too often. We see people as units and, of productivity rather than individuals who have careers and motivations and aspirations, fears and everything else. So I try to get to know people, and I try to work out how I can help them achieve what they want. And in doing that, how we can work together to get, the best possible outcome. And that's time consuming, but it's really rewarding.
It's a really interesting point. I mean, firstly, like you said, there is a challenge in our industry with people are units of utilization, and not seen as people, and that can, at its worst, filter down through behaviours. But there's an interesting part of what you said there that I guess, yes, it is time consuming up front, but actually the dividends you reap from that investment, to use a bad metaphor, is really powerful. And I guess that's what you've been able to do over your career, is those beers and time spent early on learning about people and their wants and needs, and helping them is what helps them grow in the future.
Yeah, it's someone used the term psychological safety, the other day with me. It's trying to create an environment of psychological safety, and where you have this sort of relationship of mutual trust and understanding, and you can deliver great things when you've got that environment. If people think, I'm in it for me, and it's the same with clients, actually. I take exactly the same approach with clients as I will with people internally. I want to know my clients. I want to know what they need, not only in terms of the project and the deliverable and the outcome, but what is it they need? What is it they want more broadly? And then you develop a deeper relationship. And it's not done from the point of view of, I do it because I want to sell more work to someone. It's done because I genuinely like people, and I really like trying to help people. It sounds really cheesy, but it's just how I've always operated.
Well, I completely agree with you, Alex. There's a Jim Rohn quote that I can't remember where I heard, but it was pretty simple, in that if you want to get what you want, give other people what they want. And I think, to everything you just said, it's amazing how true that is. And it's amazing, in what I do now, helping consulting firms with marketing, it's amazing how many people I'll speak to who might say, we want to sell our things to CEOs. And actually, like you've just highlighted, I always say, well, there's no such thing. There's people have challenges, personal goals. And like you say, actually, by understanding what motivates others, you can help give them what they want. And that could lead to you both being successful.
That's exactly it. I don't want to sell anything to anyone. What I want to do is help people. I want to help businesses. I want to help individuals. I want to help make them better, because that's really, really rewarding. Selling something is potentially gratifying just for you as an individual. Helping people, helping businesses is rewarding for much broader reasons.
So it wasn't necessarily a topic I was going to dive on, but I'd be interested just to expand on that a little, because I think one of the things that I remember from my time here is, to everything you've just said, you were very good at building out those relationships and the accounts that came with it. And I think, to everything you've mentioned around some of the challenges in our industry, there is almost, for some, a challenge around selling, and that view. I'm sure you still hear it. I heard it. People who I'm a delivery person. I'm not a salesperson. And it may just be everything you've just said, but for put in that sales environment. But how do you help people, particularly who are maybe in those senior grades where they're starting to have to produce business, almost make that mindset shift from, I guess, what you've highlighted of, you're not trying to sell, you're trying to build that relationship?
I mean, you can never start doing it too soon. So I guess because of the way I'm wired, I like people. I like spending time with people. So I've probably always done it from a very early stage in my career. But it's genuinely done because I like them and I want to spend time with them. And if you spend enough time with people, you understand more about their business. You understand where the challenges are for their organisation, for them as individuals, etc. You build up trust, and at a point in time, someone will say to you, "Can you help me?" So all the conversations I tend to have, I mean, I don't go to people and say, "I've got this, do you want one?" What happens is people will pick up the phone and say, "I've got this problem, can you help solve it?" And, the answer is not always yes, and shouldn't always be yes, because that's disingenuous as well. And certainly when we try and solve problems, it's not always me that's going to be solving them, because I can't. We've got many more talented people than me in this business. So I don't feel that I've ever really sold. I feel like I've built relationships because I like people, and it's done with the right intentions, and at the right time people come and ask for help. And I don't know that it's any more complicated than that. And I know that sounds very glib, but it's how it's turned out.
I have exactly the same view as you. So I completely see that. I guess for anyone listening to this, who would have been listening to this up until, say, this section, and said, I'm a delivery specialist, I'm a delivery person. Now there are, in any environment, there are people who actually that's a very valid career path, and they want to be a technical specialist, let's say. But particularly for those who aspire to take that step up to partner, And if it's not a conversation you've had with anyone, we can move on. But how do you help people who maybe don't naturally have your inclination to that relationship building, to almost help them start to move towards that?
So I'm always blown away by this, because inevitably delivery people are hugely valued, and the clients often place enormous value on them, more so than they place on themselves. And what always blows me away is people go in, do a phenomenal job, and then go. And we talk about being a good house guest, and it's really important that you do. But that doesn't mean that your relationship with someone stops. And I think what people do is they neglect that relationship, and then they almost don't have a way back to have a conversation with someone. So for me, it was always about, come back to, if you're a delivery person, you have a skill that someone places value on. If you like people, stay in touch with people, understand how that delivery's been implemented, how well it's gone afterwards, and keep the relationship going. Don't do it if it feels disingenuous, but do it because it feels good. You liked the people you work with. And I always, come back to, we talked about offering, how can I help people? How can I help you internally? I will always make the same offer to the people that I have relationships with in industry. So at the end of every meeting that I have with someone, I'll say, is there anything I can do to help you? And that's not because I want you to say, yes, here's a piece of work, I want you to buy a piece of work. But you might just want to know what's happening in the market. You might just want a bit of insight on something. You might want a bit of thought leadership. And I'm very happy to do that, because a relationship is very much a two-way thing. So make those offers. Be prepared to help people beyond the immediate delivery you're involved in. That's not about suddenly becoming a salesperson. It's just about thinking about the way you interact with people slightly differently.
And there's something really powerful almost in that point you highlighted there about not becoming a salesperson, of almost by doing that early, like you say, you build the relationship such that you don't need to become you don't need to sell in the sort of inverted commas, the Wolf of Wall Street way that people think. And actually it's almost if you don't do what you said, that's where you find yourself without relationships, without people to speak to, and suddenly you fall back on some of those, the cold calling or whatever the equivalent, whatever that equivalent is in your space. So I want to turn to something that we've touched on a couple of times. You've mentioned about how passionate the firm is, and you are on people, and you've got awards to prove it. How many years is it now for the Great Place to Work award?
Well, it's been as long as I've been here, so it's at least 13 years.
So, for anyone who doesn't know, an award that basically assesses, from your team as well, it's worth saying, how people enjoy working here. And I think you've been either number one or top 10. I think I saw it's a hall, in the Hall of Fame because of it.
Yes.
But I'd be really keen to turn to a topic within that I know you're really passionate about, which is diversity and inclusion. I think consulting is doing a lot, but there are still a lot of white men like us. What is it that you're doing here at Baringa, and almost what is it that the industry needs to do more of, in your opinion, to improve that diversity and bring more people in that inclusive way?
Wow, it's a big question. Let's start with why we do it and why we should do it. So I fundamentally believe that, it comes back to that sort of the point earlier about echo chambers. The more diverse the organisation, I think the richer the thinking. And it's not just diversity from a gender perspective or an ethnicity perspective, but it's that sort of genuine diversity of thought process, of solutioning. I think the more diverse your organisation is, the more creative your answers, the better the outcome. And fundamentally, I believe that then delivers better outcomes for your clients. And then that follows through into profitability for your business. So to me, it's a really simple equation in terms of the more diversity we drive into our business, but more importantly, the more inclusive we are, the more successful we'll be. And increasingly, we're seeing our clients demanding it of us as well. Now, I think the challenge is you've got to do it with absolute authenticity. What you can't have is a number that you target that says, I need X% of my population to be like this. Because anyone can hit a number, you can do it. But you won't create an environment that fosters that inclusive way of that, that diverse way of thinking. and values everything that brings. So I think it makes just great business sense. I've been blown away by some of the people that we've brought in and the different way of thinking that they've brought with them and what that's then done to our team. It's been phenomenal from my perspective. What does the industry do overall? Crikey. I mean, starting with that understanding, I think is really important. So understanding why you're doing it, fundamentally believing it as well, then driving diversity for the right reasons and authentically. It's hugely important. It's not easy. It's really, really not easy. But the other thing, I suppose, is I realised very early on that what it required was for me to do things differently.
Such as?
So you need to think differently. You need to be more open and receptive to different ways of thinking, different ways of engaging with people. You need to make different recruitment decisions. You need to value different things. And what you can't do is sit there and say, I'm going to do what I've done for my entire career and let someone else sort it out, and it will suddenly change. It's like any big societal change, anything that really matters. Every single person needs to do something differently. And for each individual, that will be different. But you need to make the change. It's you as Nick and Alex and everyone else in an organisation. It doesn't just happen because you've got a D&I lead, because you've got a D&I team, because you've got a gender network, etc.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, actually, like you say, around very often people can respond to these sort of things with just, like you highlighted, create a team, create a role, create an initiative, and actually it's much more structural. And how do you do that across the partnership? So you mentioned there, it starts with the person, and I completely agree. Obviously, the interesting part of a consulting business model, compared to a sort of client you might work with, is you're not the CEO who can say, right, this is how we're going to do it. You have a group of fellow partners that's now quite large. How would you recommend people go on that journey to, as a firm, embrace diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, I mean, there's no golden bullet. I think, first of all, is a recognition of the importance of it. So you have to educate people in the first instance. And sometimes you're challenging some fairly deeply held views as well. I think you have to create an environment where people are curious. So for me, I love curious people. I love people who are willing and open to be challenged. And probably the best thing I ever did, I don't know if she'll be listening. She's not with us anymore, but I had reverse mentoring by a lady called Hafsa, and she left a really profound mark on me, because it was one of those. I mean, reverse mentoring, for anyone that doesn't know, is basically, if you're senior, you get reverse mentored by someone who's more junior in the organisation, and you get to live a day or 2 days or a number of days in someone else's shoes, and it was absolutely amazing. I came out having had a number of my preconceptions quite firmly challenged.
Can you give us, because I love the concept, can you give some examples, if not because it's personal?
No, I'm more than happy. So it's things like, it has to talk me about microaggressions, which I found fascinating.
Sorry, microaggressions or microaggressions?
Aggressions.
Okay.
So how it can be, in completely unintended way, it can be quite easy to hurt someone, not through a big slight or a big action, but by lots and lots of repeated small things. And she used the great example of, saying, "Oh, where are you from?" "I'm from Crawley." "No, but where are you from, really? And the implication being, you don't look like me. You can't possibly be from England. And how those things just build up over time. And what it does is it just gets you to think differently. And, so I love things like that, because it's just the curiosity to want to go and live in someone else's shoes for a little bit and understand what makes them tick, what you can do to help make them successful, what you might do at the moment that might frustrate and get in the way. So I think driving that curiosity into an organisation, and the partners demonstrating that they are curious and want to make a change and want to make a difference. But I come back to doing it for the right reasons. Not doing it because you're told you have to, not doing it because you're trying to hit a number, but because you just want to, and you know that your business will be better if you do it well.
We may come back to the reverse mentoring, just because I love the concept, and I'm sure you've learned a ton of other things that we can dig into there. But how do you do that, I guess, in terms of getting more people in at the top? So if you think of the diversity and inclusion, like any other funnel, is you need to get more people in at the start, and then you need to keep them through the stages. Now, I know, for instance, with women, I was speaking with another guest who made the point that actually there's research that says you lose a lot of women around sort of the age that they have children. But how do you get enough people in at the top, and almost knowing about consulting and knowing about a firm like Baringa? Because if I think back to when I was at university, and maybe it was just me being naive, I barely knew what a consultancy was. I still struggle to explain it now to anyone. But either what do you do, or what have you done, or how can others start to open that door so you get more diversity at the top, to let you get more diversity or more diversity at the bottom, so you can get that more diversity at the top?
So we don't struggle to attract diverse talent. There's huge amounts of it out there. So, we've got our interviews for our internship going on at the moment. We've had over 300 applicants for 30 odd roles.
Wow.
And the diversity within that group is phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. And they're incredibly talented individuals. So you can drive diversity in through your recruitment at the bottom. I think the most important thing is creating an environment where people want to stay. And I find it quite hard talking about this thing sometimes, because clearly, I'm a guy, I'm a white guy, I've got a wife and 4 children. I've probably become, I think the phrase I use is you've got to become comfortable being uncomfortable with some of these conversations. I still find them uncomfortable, but you've got to create an environment where people want to stay and people feel that they can be successful being themselves. So that's where the inclusivity bit is really important. I think we're lucky here in some ways because we've got a culture that was founded on, or a strategy and a culture that was founded on putting the people at the heart of it. We, like every organisation, have challenges in terms of retaining people all the way through to the very top. I think what you can't do is just try and recruit your way out of it. So try and recruit people in at the top. I think that's disingenuous as well. I mean, it's one way of doing it, but I think you have to recruit, nurture, develop talent all the way through. And also recognise that it takes time. And that, I come back to that point around, it means that every single one of you has to do something slightly differently, think slightly differently, be more curious, be more open-minded, be more willing to listen to challenge and be challenged.
So I think that challenge point, it tees us nicely up to come back to the reverse mentoring. And the only reason I'm interested to touch on it is I've heard of the concept before, but I think there's a lot in there that I'm sure will be interesting for people who are in either similar positions to yourself, or actually, and this might just be my own judgments and biases of almost those more junior to you, particularly where if they've just made partner. I always think that's quite an interesting, as an outsider, I've never been there, but I always think there's an interesting dynamic there of you're sort of trying to find your feet in something, and for some people that can lead to behaviors changing for good and for bad. And I'm fascinated for anyone listening who's either in that position or where you are, of almost, why did Baringa as a firm, I assume it's firm-wide, by the way, launch this reverse mentoring? And you alluded to some of you went into detail on some of the profound effect it's had on you. Almost what benefit would it have for others if they're on the fence or they hadn't heard of it until this interview?
So we piloted it, and we're about to launch a second phase of it. I think recognition that when you're me, you look like me, you've had my kind of upbringing. I just don't know. I'm naive. I need to have my eyes open to this. And the best people to do that are the people that you're trying to recruit, retain, develop. So why on earth wouldn't you look to that population to help you better understand? I don't have answers. The answers sit within our organisation. So that's why we did it. And there was no one topic. People could talk about things that were relevant to them. It was about them as individuals, understanding them as individuals and what it was like to be them. So there was a wide range of subjects, it was, and topics that we did the reverse mentoring around. It wasn't just about gender. It wasn't just about ethnicity, albeit that's what my personal experience was.
So, and when you say topics, just to help elaborate, so you would have sessions on, or you would have one-to-ones with someone, and it would be on a topic of, you mentioned diversity, or I suspect management styles, or whatever else the topics were.
Yeah, so Hafsa was, she led me through the process, really. So it would be about what she wanted to talk about, and it would be a completely safe environment where I could ask questions, and in a safe environment where I didn't feel that I was going to be judged. It was done from the point of view of wanting, being curious and wanting to learn. And from her perspective about these are the things that I want you to understand about what it's like to be me, because you could never understand otherwise. You've not lived my life. You've not had the kind of background I've had. She gave me books to read.
Wow.
And it was just one of those, it was just one of those fascinating processes to go through. Different people took different, tacks, what it was like to, we had people who were talking about what it's like to have mental health challenges at work. It's one of the things that sadly we see, quite a lot of in our industry, because it is a high pressure industry. People would talk about that and just create that safe and open environment where people could learn.
I love the idea. And I guess, and this might be one I should ask her, not yourself, of almost the question that those sort of sessions always leave me with: what did you do or need to do up front to get your team comfortable? You mentioned it was a safe environment, which is almost the outcome. You made a safe environment, but how, for anyone listening who almost thinks, I want to do this, do you do that? Because I'm very conscious to people who are much more junior than you, they will, they'll be quite concerned. Oh, Alex is he's the head of insurance, he's a big boss. If I say the wrong thing to him, if I tell him he's, this or that, he's going to fire me. How did you get people comfortable enough to have that safe space and that safe conversation?
Yeah, we did quite a lot of prep. So there's quite a lot of, I say training. It wasn't training, there were sessions beforehand. And it was really about setting the ground rules and helping people to understand. There's a great tendency, the more senior you become, to try to think that you are there to solve problems. And as my wife repeatedly tells me, don't try and solve my problem. This isn't about you trying to fix something. What you're here to do is to listen and empathize and understand and learn. And, we had to spend quite a lot of time drilling into that at the beginning, because there's definitely a consultant's tendency to want to fix things, and that wasn't what this was about.
So I'm laughing because my wife gives me the same advice, and
it's brilliant advice.
It is, and it's advice I try my best every day and regularly fail to succeed at. I think I'm a fixer, which is not. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad.
So I've got a colleague at the moment who I won't name her, but she's one of my go-to people for advice and guidance when I need it. And sometimes she'll tap me on the shoulder and say, "Alex, you were mansplaining again." And I always think having people around you who can keep you grounded and hold you honest is really important. We come back to, my wife is very, very definitely one of those people for me.
Well, and I think it's a really important point actually that we haven't mentioned throughout, but I know from my time here, and you can tell me if it's still the same. But I think actually it's that having that psychological safety and that relationship with people at all grades that you can. I know when I was here, I wouldn't have told you were mansplaining, but I know I would have been comfortable to have that conversation with yourself or a Dave. But actually, there's a lot of work that goes into that. And I guess that's where, like you said, it's that putting people at the heart of your strategy that lets you do that.
That's absolutely right.
So, Alex, we've covered so much today, and I would love to stay and keep talking. But obviously, I know you've got a lot of things to do, and you've taken a good amount of time for this. So thank you very much for that. So I want to close with two questions. These are the ones I ask all my guests. And I know you've listened to a few of my shows, so I'm sure you know what's coming here. So the first one, and recent interviews may mean this question changes, so you may be the last one who gets this, I don't know, is about books. And so we've talked a bit about things that have had an impact on you. And for me, books have had quite a profound impact. So I always like to ask my guests, and if books aren't your thing, tell me, is there a book or books that have either had that impact on you, or you find yourself giving to others or recommending to help them on their journeys?
So I love books. I really love books, but I never read management books.
Okay.
Because for me, books are one of my escapisms. So I love fiction and I love history books. Probably the one I found most interesting recently, just finished reading a book called Prisoners of Geography, which is well worth a read.
Okay.
It's nothing to do with the world of consulting, but it's just one of those books that if you're curious about the world in which we live, it's a great read.
What you've teased me there. Give me the synopsis.
It's really about geopolitics, and it's about the way in which the geography within which nations sit, the sort of physical geography, the way that determines their foreign policy and the reasons why they go to war or don't, and the way in which they behave on the world stage.
Wow.
It's one of those fascinating books that you sit and read and think this has been written by someone who's incredibly smart, very worldly wise, but just helps explain why the world ticks in the way it does.
Wow, and it's interesting because you're not the first guest who has actually said similar. The book. I'm going to go have a look. And funnily enough, I think that's going to go on some people's Christmas present lists. I know we're only in February, but I know a few people I know will love that. But it's interesting that actually it was. I've had a few guests now, like yourself, who see books as that relaxation and, like you said, escapism. And actually, it's the joy of reading and taking yourself either into another world or a learning area. I'm intrigued. What's your go-to fiction series? Is there a series or is there a genre you lean towards?
I love Ben McIntyre. So he writes a lot of brilliant books on sort of spy history and war history and things like that. Robert Harris, I've always loved his writing. Sebastian Faulks, Ian McEwan. There's sort of, it depends what mood I'm in, quite honestly. And then, you mentioned that I like flying. I love books on the history of flying and planes. I always describe myself, I'm a real geek. I'm a proper geek and I'm very proud of it. So I love reading books on planes.
Fantastic, Alex. And then the last question, and again, take this where you want. And this could be a recap. This could be an addition. So the question is quite simply, you have three people in front of you, and these people span the consulting grades. One is a graduate, an analyst. One is, I'm not going to give years. I've stopped. I say manager level, and then I massively undersell the number of years it takes to get to manager. So let's say middle of career in consulting. And then the third person is that director wanting to or approaching partnership. And the question is quite simply, what one piece of advice would you give to each of those people?
For the person starting out, a bit of advice that I was given and I absolutely ignored, so I'm going to give it in retrospect, was your career is a marathon, not a sprint. I was told that by a brilliant guy called Jim Reeve that I worked with years and years ago. And I completely ignored him. But it was, with the benefit of hindsight, he was absolutely right. So don't get hung up on this day, this promotion, this month, play the long game. We talked a lot about the long game and, doing things for the right reason over the long period of time. So I think, I'd definitely say that. And then probably a similar variation of that when you're a manager, you're several years into your career. It's probably felt like a long, hard slog to get where you are at the moment. And, again, play the long game. It's, if you want to be a consultant for the rest of your life, then, it's years and years and years of work. So for people at that level, I'd probably just say, make sure you find a way of enjoying it, really, really enjoying it. So it's like anything in life. If it's enjoyable, it's worth doing. If it's not, you maybe need to question A, either why you're doing it, or B, the way you're doing it. So find a way to enjoy it or get out. And then for the director, don't become dysfunctional. So I always find that people are at their most dysfunctional just before promotion points. And I think particularly, the more senior you get, because you've clearly put a huge amount of work into getting to that point in your career. Again, do it for the right reasons, play the long game, and just hold true to you. Don't try and be something you're not because you're close to being a partner. Because when you're a partner, you're not starting again, but your career almost gets going again. So it's got to be sustainable, and you've got to do it in the right way.
Fantastic, Alex. Well, I think that is a great place for us to finish today. So thank you so much for this. And for anyone listening who wants to find out more about yourself, wants to find out more about Baringa Partners, where would you point them to? Where can they get in touch?
Yeah, by all means, like everyone, I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free to drop me a message. I'm more than happy to chat to people who are interested to talk.
Fantastic, Alex. Well, thank you very much and all the best for the rest of your week.
Thanks, Nick. I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Climb in Consulting podcast. If you did, I would be very grateful if you could leave a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or your podcast platform of choice, whichever one you may be using. And please also share this with anyone that you think could benefit from hearing today's interview. If you want to get in touch or give me any feedback about the podcast, please feel free to drop me an email. It's nick@climbinconsulting.com, and I look forward to hearing from you.